Hello, I'm Tracy Nicholas, and welcome to Folkloring. I am a passionate folklore practitioner, and to me, folkloring is more than just a podcast. It's my commitment to help you connect with your roots and awaken the wisdom within you.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Folkloring, which is going to be all about the folklore of eggs. And we often think about eggs in the springtime having to do with Easter and Ostara, but eggs actually feature predominantly in folklore and legend all year long. And so we're going to get into that. But first, I wanted to let you know how I've been folkloring lately. I've continued on with my plan to befriend the crows, and they now let me know when they want me to run outside and give them some peanuts to eat by landing on the power lines above my yard and calling out to me. So I'm getting better trained in making sure that happens. It's also wrapping up the end of the autumn season for me, and so I've gotten some of the very last herbs out of my garden. I got some late oregano and some sage and a bunch of chives. I also put my strawberries in the ground. I had them in containers, which was great, but it just gets too cold here, and I think that they won't overwinter if their roots aren't a little bit better protected in the ground. So, eggs. Now, a couple of fun facts about eggs before I start in on the folklore. The entire yolk of an egg is only one cell, and it's one of nature's largest. And the ostrich egg, which can serve, they say it can serve up to 24 people for breakfast, is probably the largest cell that nature manufactures. Now, the color of the eggs is strictly a function of the breed of the bird. And you can usually tell what color egg a chicken will lay by looking at the color of the chicken's earlobe. Believe it or not, they actually do have earlobes. And so hens with a white ear will produce white eggs, red ears produce brown eggs, and hens with bluish-green ears will produce bluish-green eggs. So I found that very interesting. I had no idea that chickens had earlobes. Now, there's a test that's, kind of old-fashioned, but it's a valid test for seeing how fresh an egg is. And you basically gently drop a whole uncooked egg into water, like a couple of cups of water with 2 tablespoons of salt in it. And if the egg is very fresh, it will be heavy and it will sink and tip to one side. And if it's moderately fresh, it'll remain suspended in the middle of the water upright. And if it bobs up to the top, it's stale. Now, as far as the egg yolk, the feed that the chicken has is what determines the color of the yolk. So if the chicken eats grass, yellow corn, or other stuff rich in yellow pigments, the yolk will be that deep yellow color that you see. And this is true regardless of the breed of the chicken or the color of the shell. Now, when you are boiling eggs, hard-boiling eggs, when you see that greenish-gray color around the yolk, when you've done it just a little too much, that's actually a harmless compound. It's iron and sulfur called ferrous sulfide, which forms when an egg is heated. And so, of course, to prevent this, you have to be really careful on timing and only boil the egg as long as necessary. And then when it's done, immediately plunge it into cold water. And I usually do ice water when I'm boiling eggs. Now, according to folklore, you can stand a raw egg on end during the spring equinox or fall equinox, and it will stand upright by itself. Now, there was an old wives' tale that suggested that the shape of an egg indicates the sex that the chick that'll hatch from it will be. Unfortunately, there is absolutely no truth to that myth. There is a lot of lore around eggs being a fertility symbol. And in a lot of those legends, they're associated with that other symbol of fertility, the rabbit. And so if we look toward Easter, the term Easter Bunny first appeared in 16th century German writings, and it said there that if well-behaved children build a nest out of their cap or bonnet, they would be rewarded with colored eggs. And that is part of how it became to be in American folklore when German immigrants started settling into the eastern U.S. They brought that with them. Now, looking at Persia, eggs have been painted for thousands of years as part of the spring celebration of Nowruz, which is the Zoroastrian New Year. And in Iran, the colored eggs are placed on the dinner table at Nowruz, and a mother eats one cooked egg for each child that she has. And that might get to be a challenge in some families. Now, the festival of Nowruz predates the reign of Cyrus the Great, who ruled from 580 to 529 BCE, and that marked the beginning of Persian history. So this festival does predate that. In some early Christian cultures, the consumption of the Easter egg might have marked the end of Lent, because during medieval times, eggs were often forbidden during Lent. And so the end of this fasting period would have been celebrated by, being able to eat eggs again. And they would have done that with, great enthusiasm. And this tradition is speculated that it evolved into the modern Easter egg hunt, which, they're running around looking for these eggs and it's exciting to find the eggs, especially after you haven't had them for 40 days. Now, in Greek Orthodox Christianity, there is a legend that after Christ's death on the cross, Mary Magdalene went to the Emperor of Rome and told him of Jesus' resurrection. And the emperor's response was skeptical and hinted that such an event was just about as likely as a nearby bowl of eggs suddenly turning red. And much to their surprise, the bowl of eggs did turn red. And so Mary Magdalene began to joyfully preach Christianity throughout the land. In Greece, they have an Easter tradition that really gives eggs a starring role. There's a custom that involves tapping two eggs dyed red against each other. And the person whose egg remains uncracked is said to have good luck for the year. And this often turns into sort of a lively competition between friends and family. In ancient Egypt, they saw the egg as a symbol of renewal and rebirth, much like the daily rising of the sun. And the god Khnum was often depicted as a ram-headed deity, molding humans on a potter's wheel from the primordial egg. And in Egyptian creation myths, the egg also played a crucial role. And there's one version that tells of the cosmic egg that was laid by the celestial goose. And from that egg, the sun god Ra emerged to create the world. And we see other creation tales around the world that feature eggs prominently. There are some Native American stories that involve the cracking of a giant egg to form the universe, or possibly the earth, or even the gods. And there's a Chinese folktale that tells the story of the formation of the universe, and there was a deity named Pangu. And that deity formed inside an egg. And then in his efforts to get out, he cracked it in two halves. And the upper portion of the egg became the sky and the cosmos, and the lower became the earth and the sea. And as that god grew more and more powerful, the gap between the earth and the sky increased, and soon they were separated forever. In Greek mythology, we have a story also about the gods. It's the famous story of Leda and the swan, where Zeus transforms into a swan and seduces Leda, as so many Greek myths start out, and she lays two eggs, from which emerge Helen of Troy and the twins Castor and Pollux. And so, this blends divine intervention with fertility and birth. looking at some superstitions next. There is an old English superstition that if you're a girl who wants to see who your true love is, you place an egg in front of your fire on a stormy night. And as the rain picks up and the wind begins to howl, the man that you'll marry will come through the door and pick up the egg. I'm not sure why he was out in the storm, but there you have it. In a similar story from the Ozarks, if a girl boils an egg and then removes the yolk and fills the empty space with salt, then she eats the salted egg at bedtime, she will dream about a man bringing her a pail of water to quench her thirst. And this is the man that she'll marry. In Britain, there was a tale popular among sailors that after you eat a boiled egg, you should always crush up the shells. Otherwise, evil spirits or witches could sail the seven seas in the shell cup and sink entire fleets with their sorcery and magic. Now, in American folk magic, eggs appear regularly in agricultural superstition. A farmer who would want to set his eggs under broody hens should only do so during the full moon. Otherwise, many of them will not hatch. Eggs carried around in a woman's bonnet will provide the best pullets, and eggs placed in a man's hat will all produce roosters. Owls' eggs are said to be a cure for alcoholism when scrambled up and fed to someone who has a drinking problem. Now, dirt found under a mockingbird's eggs can be used to alleviate sore throat. And in Appalachia, a hen's egg, which is seen as too small to bother with cooking, can be tossed on the roof of your house to appease the witches. In Japan, the cherry blossom viewing festival, or the Hanami festival, was not traditionally associated with eggs, but they've started seeing eggs incorporated in more modern times. Some people bring decorated eggs to their picnics under the blooming trees, and even chefs have begun creating egg dishes into Hanami-themed meals, like an egg sushi roll designed to look like a cherry blossom. So that's a kind of interesting new twist on that festival. Now, a few British egg superstitions. First one is breaking an egg and finding a blood spot is a bad omen. And eggs laid on Good Friday are believed to never go off, never go bad. And so those are often saved. I suppose for a day when your chicken isn't laying. Now, it's unlucky to leave a single egg in a box, as that could bring bad luck. Eating eggs with 2 yolks will bring on a marriage proposal within a month. And eggs should always be stored pointy end down to preserve freshness and avoid spoilage. Eggs should not be given as a gift, for that's believed to bring bad luck. And finally, another double yolk superstition, that they are a sign of good luck, which leads me to a little bit more in-depth look at double-yolked eggs. Now, in ancient times, double-yolked eggs were often seen as a sign of good fortune and abundance, and it was believed that it was a blessing from the gods, and it was a very fortuitous event and brought good luck and prosperity. And in some cultures, it was believed that finding a double yolk was an indication of a bountiful harvest or even a successful hunting expedition. Double-yolked eggs are even more closely tied to abundance and good luck because obviously, there's more yolk inside there, so you get an extra bonus in the egg. And let's be serious, I always think it's fun to find it just because it is a little more unusual. Now, it can symbolize interconnectedness between the natural world and the realm of the divine or the spirit world, and it can be considered possibly a nudge from the spirit realm. And we can use it to serve as a reminder that we're not alone on our journey. There's a greater power out there. We're still connected to our ancestors, all those kinds of things. it also might symbolize the potential for personal and spiritual transformation, because they can remind us that within the ordinary can lie the extraordinary, and that we have the power to grow and evolve beyond where we are at currently in life, and even a chance to break free from old patterns to embrace a life of growth and fulfillment, because the normal pattern is having the one yoke. And so just that symbolism in there to remind us that we can take a different path and choose new patterns. Next, I'm going to look quickly at some non-egg eggs. Now, we've all heard some version of the story of the goose who laid the golden egg. And this is obviously a morality tale about greed and having patience and waiting for good things to come to you. And when the farmer kills the goose, obviously there's nothing in there but a regular old goose, and then he was no longer getting the golden eggs. So that's some interesting symbolism about value and how we place value. The next, not actually an egg I want to talk about, is something called a fairy egg. And residents of the Scottish Isles and other northern kind of coasts for hundreds of years, had been finding what they called fairy eggs. And they were large and brown and sort of vaguely egg-shaped, but like a little bit flattened. It seemed like they were made of wood or something similar. They were buoyant, and sometimes they would even be heart-shaped. And they also called these strand nuts or sea nuts because they were obviously washing up on shore. And early naturalists didn't really, they were trying to figure out where they came from because the origins were a mystery. They just kept washing up on shore. And they believed early on that they might come from underwater plants like coral or seaweed, something like that. But other people believed them to be like flotsam from shipwrecks or items dropped overboard by sailors. In Ireland, the fairy eggs were used as protection against fairies and, to avoid the misfortune that the fairies would bring to the Irish. And the Sidhe were often trying to take people as they slept. So they would lay these fairy eggs under their pillow as a charm against, nighttime visits from fairies and being stolen. Fairy eggs were used as amulets against drowning by sailors, and amulets for childbirth by women who passed them down to their daughters through generations. Now, in some places where they washed up, they were carved out and used as snuff boxes or matchboxes, lockets, maybe rattles for children. They believed that if they kept a fairy egg in the house, it protected the building from fire. And a lot of people believed them to be good luck charms and turned them into jewelry by binding them in silver or perhaps tin. And in other places, they were gathered and worn as protection from the evil eye, or even used as folk medicine for dysentery or diarrhea and to cure sick cows. Now, at some point, a few curious botanists took some of these fairy eggs and planted them, and some of them actually sprouted and grew. And what grew wasn't like any other plants that they found in Scotland or Norway or any of those areas, anywhere in the north. And the plant looked like a really gnarled, twisted, vine-like plant that grew. So I suppose if fairies ever created a tree, that might be what it looked like. What it turned out to actually be was a plant called the monkey ladder tree, which is a legume that grows in Central America and the Caribbean. And the fairy eggs are actually seeds that grow in the longest seed pod in the world, up to 6.5 feet long. And the seeds are, large, like I said, the size of the palm of your hand. They also are very light and buoyant, and they can remain viable for up to 2 years floating around in the sea. And so the these, seafaring seeds helped early scientists understand and illustrate the existence of the Gulf Stream. And so a seed that falls in Central America can easily wash up in Orkney 15 months later, propelled along by the Gulf Stream. So, very interesting little bit of apotropaic magic that I had not heard of before. And if anyone has any idea where I can track one of these down, please let me know, because I would love to get one. Okay, so we're going to move on and talk about folkloring that has to do with eggs. And the first, which I think is one of the most obvious, is you can dye your eggs. Now, obviously, if it is in your time and schedule that you have to go buy dye from the store, you got to make your life work. But if you do want to do some more natural dyes, some suggestions I have: if you want to do yellow eggs, you can use ground turmeric in some water. And if you want to have pink eggs, you can use a cup of shredded beets. If you want to do blue, you can use purple or red cabbage to turn the eggs blue, or you could use some blueberries. If you want to turn them purple, a cup of red onion skins will turn eggs red or purple. And you can use black tea if you want to turn them brown. And if you want to turn them orange, you can use 1 cup of chopped yellow onion skins. And you mix that with a cup of water and a couple of teaspoons of white vinegar. And then you take whatever dye that you want to use. You could put a tablespoon of salt in there, or if you wanted to put some light brown sugar, a tablespoon or 2, and that'll help the colors set. And so you bring the water and the dye ingredients to a boil, and then you turn down the heat to simmer the ingredients for about 30 minutes, and you let the water cool down, and you dip the eggs into the solution. And obviously, the longer that they're in the dyed water, the more vivid the color will be. And you can let them brine from anywhere from 8 hours to up to a few days. And then you just let the eggs dry, and there you have it. Another thing that you can do with eggs at home, you can try your hand at umancy. And this is divination with eggs and also egg cleansing. And it also can be known as ovomancy, ovamancy, uscopia, umancia, and umancia. The name comes from the ancient Greek word for egg, which is un, and mancia meaning divination. So pretty obvious there. And this practice has been pretty common. One reason of which is that eggs are pretty abundant and it's pretty easy to acquire them. It was thought to have originated in ancient Greece and Rome. So what you want to do is you want to fill up a clear glass bowl with water, and you want to cleanse with the egg by rolling it down your body. And you start at the crown of your head, allow it to absorb any negative energy or impurities that are within you, and then you want to crack it into the water. And there's a bunch of different signs that you can look for when you're looking at the egg in water. If you do use hot water, that may make some of these images a little bit easier to see because it'll partially cook the egg as it's sort of falling into the water, but you don't have to do that. Now, in general, even if you're not doing a cleansing of yourself beforehand, there is, if you have a bad smell or a yolk with blood or black spots, that indicates a curse. And if you see the face of a person in it and you recognize that face, it means that might have been a person that wished harm upon you. And if you see an eye, it could mean that an evil eye is upon you and you need to then, of course, take protective measures. Now, as we said earlier, double yolk is a sign of good luck. And if you're dating, it can foretell marriage. Or if you're expecting pregnancy, that's a very promising sign and can even indicate twins. Now, if you break the yolk while you're dropping it into the water, you will not have good luck in the future. And if there's no yolk, that's a really bad omen all around. If there are bubbles coming up in the water, that means you're being protected by guides and guardians. And if you see the shape of an animal, of course, you can, whatever that symbolism of that animal means to you, you can interpret that through your own experience. Now, if it's clear, if the white is clear or mostly clear, that is a good indication that there is a lack of negative energy. And this suggests that if you're doing cleansing, your current cleansing methods have been effective. If there are strings of white, however, in that egg white, it symbolizes negative energetic cords that might need to be severed. And again, blood in the yolk can indicate physical illness or even a spiritual attack. And if it's cloudy, that represents negative energy that's been lifted off an individual if you have done the cleansing first. If you did do the cleansing first, you can, and you got a negative response to it, you can continue to repeat the same process of rubbing the egg over your body as many times as you need to. And if you want to cleanse and ground and shield in between, just keep doing that until all the signs are good and there's no more indication of a curse or anything negative surrounding you. Another thing that you can use involving eggs in magic is called blessing eggs. Now, these eggs are blown out, so you put a hole on either end of the egg, and I find that it's much easier to blow out an egg if you shake it really vigorously before, because that can help break up the yolk, which makes it easier to get out, because those holes are pretty little. So you blow out the egg, and you fill up, you wash the egg shell, and then you fill up the egg with herbs that correspond with whatever your intention is. Obviously, you have to let it dry out completely before you start this process with the herbs, and you have to make the holes large enough to get the herbs in there. And you can also, once that's done, you can paint the shell a corresponding color. You can draw sigils or runes on there if you want. Now, if you don't have time for all of that, that's okay. You can also obviously just eat eggs and prepare them however you like, but consider the symbolism of eggs, some of the symbolism I talked about earlier, while you're preparing them and while you're eating them. And that's an easy way to incorporate some egg magic into your life. Another thing that I have gotten in the habit of doing, and I may have talked about this before, is I use crushed up eggshell in my garden. And I have a dedicated coffee grinder that I use only for eggshells and nothing else, because I assume that the grinder blades get worn down pretty quickly with breaking up the eggshells. Fun little note about that is I have been in the habit of years of buying brown eggs. I don't know why. They're probably cheaper at one point, and so I just got in that habit. But when I do grind up the eggs to a very fine powder, it actually turns out to be pink. And for some reason, I find that hilarious. But, you just use it. You can use it in the spring when you first turn over your garden, put it in the garden. You can use it with your houseplants, and it adds a lot of calcium. And I am a big believer because I had a row of arborvitae that I planted when I first moved into this house, and they just never took off. And it was 6-7 years, and they didn't grow. They didn't change much at all. They didn't thrive. And one year I decided, before putting mulch down, before the winter, I would put down a bunch of ground eggshell. And I did that. And the following year, those trees doubled in size. It was astonishing. And so it looks like the people who have lived here over the years have not really done much to the yard as far as the health of the soil. So I've started doing that a lot more in all of the areas of my yard to keep it healthy. Okay, well, that is all the folkloring I have around the topic of eggs. If you think of anything else you want to share, please send us a message or put your comments in wherever you're listening to the podcast. And thank you again for taking the time to listen about the folklore of eggs, and keep folkloring.
As always, thanks for listening to Folkloring. If you liked what you heard, please consider leaving a rating and review. And don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast app so you never miss an episode. If you have any questions or comments, or would like to suggest a topic for a future episode, please email us at folkloringpod@gmail.com or message us on Facebook or Instagram. Other places you can find me are at the Folklore Podcast as the theater, film, and storytellers correspondent, or creating folklore-inspired games at madmenandheroes.com. Stay curious, stay connected, and keep the traditions alive. And I hope that wherever you are, folklore is making your life more magical.